Welcome to the Beware Collectivism podcast. This podcast is designed as an analytical resource for students, policymakers, researchers, and informed citizens who seek to understand the wide-ranging consequences of the political and ideological movement broadly referred to as woke progressivism. Over the past 2 decades, this movement has expanded from university campuses into every major sphere of public life: corporate boardrooms, government agencies, school curricula, media institutions, and international policy bodies. The central argument of this podcast is not that compassion, environmental stewardship, or equal opportunity are unworthy goals. Rather, it is that the specific policy mechanisms chosen by the progressive movement to advance these goals, regulatory mandates, government subsidies, identity-based resource allocation, speech restrictions, and central economic planning, carry enormous and frequently ignored costs: economic costs, costs to individual liberty, costs to institutional trust, and costs to the social fabric of free societies. Each episode examines a distinct dimension of this phenomenon, drawing on economic data, historical precedent, and comparative policy analysis from multiple countries. Readers are encouraged to evaluate the evidence independently, weigh competing interpretations, and arrive at their own conclusions about the proper relationship between government power, collective goals, and individual freedom. The questions raised here: how much power should governments hold over private economic decisions? Who defines equity, and who enforces it? What is the true cost of carbon zero mandates on working families? Are among the most important questions a free society can ask. This podcast is an attempt to ask them seriously. The war on fossil fuels, energy policy, and economic harm. 5.1 The strategic importance of domestic energy production. Energy is not merely an economic input. It is the foundational resource upon which all modern industrial society rests. Every sector of the economy, manufacturing, agriculture, transportation, healthcare, communication, construction, depends fundamentally on the availability of reliable, affordable energy. The cost of energy determines the competitiveness of industries, the purchasing power of households, and the geopolitical leverage of nations. The United States achieved energy independence for the first time in generations through the shale oil and gas revolution of the 2000s and 2010s, driven by private sector innovation in hydraulic fracturing, fracking, and horizontal drilling. By 2019, the United States was the world's largest producer of both oil and natural gas, an outcome that dramatically reduced energy costs, strengthened the U.S. current account, and diminished OPEC's ability to use energy as a geopolitical weapon. This achievement was accomplished not by government mandate, but by private entrepreneurs responding to market incentives. Biden administration anti-fossil fuel policies and their consequences. Within hours of taking office in January 2021, President Biden issued executive orders canceling the Keystone XL pipeline and suspending new oil and gas leasing on federal lands and waters. These actions were the opening salvo in an aggressive anti-fossil fuel policy agenda that included cancellation of the Keystone XL pipeline, eliminating 11,000 union construction jobs, and blocking 830,000 barrels per day of Canadian oil from reaching U.S. refineries. A suspension of new oil and gas leases on federal lands, covering approximately 28% of U.S. oil and 14% of U.S. natural gas production. Restrictions on LNG export terminals, limiting U.S. ability to supply allies with American natural gas. Expanded methane emissions regulations imposing significant compliance costs on oil and gas producers. EPA regulations requiring retirement of coal power plants on accelerated timelines. Vehicle emissions standards mandating rapid transition to electric vehicles, with targets effectively requiring 67% of new car sales to be EVs by 2032. The consequences were swift and severe. Average U.S. gasoline prices rose from $2.39 per gallon when Biden took office to a record $5.01 in June 2022. Natural gas prices spiked from approximately $2.50 per million British thermal units to over $9 per million British thermal units. Household energy bills rose sharply across the country. The administration initially blamed these price increases on Vladimir Putin's invasion of Ukraine, but the price increases began months before the invasion, driven primarily by the administration's own supply-restricting policies. Energy Metric, January 2021, Biden inauguration. Peak 2022. Economic impact. Average gasoline price, $/gal. $2.39. $5.01, June 2022, added $2,000 plus/year per household. Natural gas, $/MMBTU. $2.50. $9.85. Heating bills doubled/tripled. Electricity costs, cents/kilowatt hour. 10.4. 16.5 plus, 2023. Hurt manufacturers, households. Crude oil, $/barrel. $53. $123, June 2022. Transportation costs spike across economy. U.S. oil production, MB/D. 11.0. 11.8. Slow recovery. Below pre-pandemic 13.1 megabits per day peak. The Keystone XL cancellation, a case study in ideological economics. The cancellation of the Keystone XL pipeline is one of the clearest illustrations of how progressive energy ideology sacrifices concrete economic and worker interests for symbolic political gestures. The pipeline had been designed to transport 830,000 barrels per day of Canadian oil sands crude from Alberta to U.S. refineries in Nebraska and onward to the Gulf Coast. It had been under development for over a decade, had cleared multiple environmental impact reviews, and had received a presidential permit from the Trump administration. The decision to cancel it was made purely on ideological grounds. The pipeline had become a symbol of opposition to fossil fuels for progressive environmental groups, and canceling it had been a Biden campaign promise. The consequences included immediate elimination of 11,000 jobs, including 8,000 union construction jobs, that the State Department itself had projected as the pipeline's direct employment effect. A loss of approximately $3.4 billion in wages that those workers would have earned. A continued transport of that same Canadian oil by rail and truck, a mode of transport that is 4 to 7 times more expensive and produces significantly more carbon emissions per barrel than pipeline transport, directly contradicting the stated environmental rationale. Strained U.S.-Canada relations at a critical moment for North American energy security. The oil did not stop flowing. It simply flowed less efficiently and more dangerously. The pipeline's cancellation did not prevent a single barrel of Canadian oil sands crude from reaching market. It simply made that oil more expensive to transport, destroyed jobs in doing so, and produced worse environmental outcomes than the alternative it replaced. The electric vehicle mandate and its hidden costs. The Biden administration's EPA regulations established emissions standards for passenger vehicles so stringent that they effectively required automakers to shift the majority of their production to battery electric vehicles, BEVs, by the early 2030s. This represented a government mandate for the largest transformation of a consumer goods industry in American history, imposed not by legislative vote but by administrative regulation. The economic costs and distributional consequences of this mandate are substantial. Vehicle affordability. The average price of an electric vehicle in the United States was approximately $60,000 in 2023, roughly $20,000 to $25,000 more than an equivalent internal combustion engine vehicle. While prices are declining, the EV price premium remains significant, and working-class households who purchase used vehicles rather than new ones will face an extended period in which affordable EV options are unavailable. Meanwhile, mandates that reduce internal combustion engine production will reduce the supply and increase the price of used ICE vehicles, the primary transportation resource for lower-income Americans. Charging infrastructure inequality. EV charging infrastructure is disproportionately available in affluent urban and suburban areas. Rural residents, apartment dwellers, and those without off-street parking have limited or no practical ability to charge an EV at home, making EV ownership significantly more burdensome for them than for wealthy homeowners with garages. A government mandate for EV adoption effectively subsidizes a transportation upgrade for the affluent while creating additional burdens for the less affluent. Battery supply chain and geopolitical risk. The minerals required for EV batteries, lithium, cobalt, nickel, manganese, are heavily concentrated in a small number of countries. China controls approximately 60% of the global lithium processing capacity and 80% of battery manufacturing capacity. A rapid mandatory transition to EVs, therefore, creates a new strategic dependency on China that is potentially more dangerous than the oil dependency it is designed to replace. We've reached the end of this week's episode of the Beware Collectivism podcast. We appreciate you joining us this week and hope you subscribe and join us again next week for another episode. Check out our website as well as our other podcasts centered on philosophy and democracy by visiting the notes below. Thank you and have a wonderful week ahead.